Hello and welcome to the Federal. I am Giri Prakash. In today's the Federal conversation, I have Mr. Rishi Agarwal, who's the co-founder of and the CEO of Team Lease RegTech. He'll be our guest today. Team Lease RegTech is India's leading one of India's leading regulatory technology solutions company, which enables ease of doing business for over 1,500 legal entities across 28 states and 8 union territories. Let me tell you a bit of a background on Mr. Agarwal. Mr. Agarwal graduated from IIT Varanasi, which is the Banaras Hindu University, and IIM Kolkata. He's also part of a very interesting expert committee which advises the empowered group of ministers on job creation in the Indian economy post-pandemic. This part of generating ideas on the ease of doing business in India and its role in job creation. He has recently co-authored a report titled Jailed for Doing Business, highlighting deeply ingrained hostility and mistrust in India's regulatory ecosystem. And apart from that, Mr. Agarwal is a passionate photographer. He has also published a coffee table book called Varanasi, A Passage to Immortality. I assume he did this during his tenure with IIT Varanasi. Welcome, Mr. Agarwal.
Well, thank you, Giri. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So let me start off by asking you about your work that you did as part of the expert committee on job creation in Indian economy post-pandemic. If you could brief us on that.
Sure. So, well, my area of expertise, Giri, is ease of doing business. Over the last many years, as a company, we've been working with hundreds of entrepreneurs around the length and breadth of the country, helping them stay on the right side of the law with our digital technology solutions. In doing so, one good thing that happens is we get exposed to what is not right with India's regulatory ecosystem. The complexities, the duplications, the redundancies. A lot of these laws were written in colonial times. If you look at any one of the major acts that are applicable to Indian entrepreneurs today, let's take Minimum Wages Act or Factories Act, most of them were written in 1948. So the core structure of these laws has not changed in the last 75 years. While the country has changed, the digital has transformed the world, the core of our regulations still continue to be from the colonial times. So over the period of time, a lot of redundancies have crept in. The same requirement is there from different acts. The coherence that is required is lacking. That has led to a lot of ambiguity. It has also led to duplication, redundancy, inefficiency. It's not easy for an entrepreneur to straightforward comply. They need a battery of lawyers and company secretaries and chartered accountants and labor consultants in order to stay on the right side of the law. And over the years, the cost of poor compliance and cost of compliance both have continued to go up. So as a part of the group, my focus was to highlight some of these issues so that we could make fundamental reforms in the economy, leading to unleashing the animal instincts among Indian entrepreneurs in the 21st century digital India.
So now that you're part of the expert committee, what finally happened in terms of, was there anything on the ground that one could see visibly the kind of efforts that you put in?
So the committee was a specific assignment, Giri. It was created for a specific period, and I was a part of the committee, and my focus was to provide recommendations. Obviously, some of these recommendations can be implemented with a flick of a pen, but a majority of them require deeper deliberations within the policymakers and the government. So some of those actions may have been initiated after that.
But so it was any highlights of those? Okay. Any highlights of those recommendations, if you could like to share with our viewers?
So those recommendations, I have continued to speak about them in various forums. And one of them is to rationalize India's employer compliance universe. There are 1,536 unique acts and rules that are applicable to Indian employers across union, state, and local body regulations. Subsumed in them are about 69,233 unique compliances, and there are about 6,618 unique filings across the law of the land that are applicable to Indian employers. One of the recommendations has been to scrutinize some of these, test them for relevance, for duplication, for redundancies, so that we can take stock of what is currently applicable, see if there is an opportunity to rationalize it, so that the overall compliance burden on entrepreneurs can come down. As an example, if you look at our labor laws, most of them were written during the colonial era. There are 13 different formats of wage register in different names. All of them basically target getting employer to put the wages given to the associates in specific formats. But across acts and rules, the jurisdictions and the appropriate governments and the officers change. The formats are different, and the same wage register has to be created in different formats for different inspectors in different departments. Now, one of the simple suggestions here is, why don't we have one format of a wage register, which is a superset of all the requirements across various government departments, and make sure that an entrepreneur is subject to only one wage register rather than 13 different wage registers. Now, I can give you similar examples in other areas also. But the good news is that the codification of labor law has been going on for some time now. All the 4 codes have already gone through the parliament test. Draft notifications are already out for some time. And we hope that the labor law codification process completes and becomes live sometime soon. So that's an example of what we call as the rationalise. Similarly, as you know, there are 26,134 provisions for imprisonment among India's 69,233 unique compliances. So that means 37% of our compliances carry provisions for jail term. We have published a detailed report, Gautam Chikarmane, Observer Research Foundation, and I. We authored a detailed report. It's a data-driven dissection of India's employer compliance universe. And we have isolated those 26,134 items which carry clauses for imprisonment. One of the key observations there is that about 30 to 40% of them are tactical non-compliances or procedural lapses. And we have used this example many times, but failing to whitewash the inner walls of latrines once every 4 months can lead to an imprisonment going up to several months to a couple of years. Now, that's a tactical non-compliance. In the 21st century, a lot of toilets have ceramic wall tiles all the way to the ceiling. But if you go by the book, an entrepreneur can technically be sent to jail. Now, that creates a lot of opportunities for rent-seeking and corruption. So one of our recommendations always has been to decriminalize India's regulatory ecosystem, reduce hostility and ingrained distrust among the laws, so that over a period of time, India can become a reasonably safe destination for entrepreneurship, where Inspector Raj can also come down and potential corruption opportunities also come down. So I think that's one of the other big suggestions on decriminalize. And then, as you know, we are extremely ambitious as a country when it comes to digital economy. We are looking for our digital economy to become a $1 trillion digital economy very shortly. So digital is an area where we understand it really well, and we have shown evidences of that, be it digital payments or any other form of utilization of digital with 800 million smartphones connected to 4G and now 5G. The opportunities of digital are only going to rise. So just the way we have created Aadhaar for citizens, one of our recommendations is to create an equivalent of Aadhaar called a unique enterprise number for enterprises. Today, an enterprise carries 23 unique identities. There is a PF number, there is a ESI number, there is a TAN number, there is a PAN number, there is a GST number, there is a minimum CLRA number. I mean, I can go on. There are 23 unique identities that an enterprise carries. There is no one identity that is currently being used to identify an entity. So just like we used to have a similar situation for citizens in the past, and Aadhaar has kind of bridged the gap, we also need a universal enterprise number so that comprehensive compliance, history, and risk profiling of an enterprise can be done. And not all entrepreneurs are targeted because some of them will always engage in practices which are unfair and illegal. So we think that a very small percentage of the entrepreneurs engage in those kinds of practices, and our laws have to have a framework to differentiate between those who are on the right side of the law, who intend to be on the right side of the law, and those who are going to engage in malpractices. So we should not treat all entrepreneurs or paint them with the same brush. So the objective is to have some ways, framework-based approaches using data, using past behaviors, using digital tools, so that we can clearly separate the milk from water in this case.
Yeah. Very interesting. I actually remember that I reading somewhere that for a very long time, much after independence, there was actually a rule which prevented any brown or black person to sit in a railway compartment if there was a white man sitting there. And much later, that regulation was taken away. But when you talk about the colonial era and stuff like that, did all these regulations come after 1947? Number one, and what is the reason for coming up with so many of these regulatory requirements? Because if you get into the fact, if you try to find out what exactly was the reason, I assume the solution becomes much easier to have.
So I will not go and second guess the policymakers in 1930s, 40s, and 50s, but at the time, our political imperatives, our social imperatives, our economic imperatives were very different from what they are today. We had just become independent. We were figuring out how to govern ourselves. At the same time, our economy was in tatters. We needed to rebuild it. Public sector bore the lion's share of that burden, right? Private sector was still fledgling. There was hardly any capital there. We had no access to technology. So there was a time in 1940s when our policymakers were dealing with a lot of different types of challenges. And at the time, our social as well as our economic leanings were different from what they are today. And based on that, a policy framework was constituted, which one can argue was suitable for the time. But guess what? 75 years have passed, right? The role of private sector has changed dramatically in the country. The role of public sector in job creation is next to nothing. A very small role they play. Majority of the capital formation, entrepreneurship generation happens in the private sector. But if you look at the results over 75 years, the contribution of manufacturing jobs to our GDP is still almost the same. While the world's supply chains are reconfiguring to find a China plus one, we still struggle to become that destination which is attractive for foreign investors. So while we do attract over $50 billion or $55 billion, whatever that number is every year, but that number can be a lot larger than where it is if we go ahead and work on fundamental reforms. Monetary policy and fiscal policies have kind of come to an end of where they can influence things. I think the country needs more fundamental and foundational reforms to change the course of.
I agree with you. Yeah. So, having said that, now that you have recommended, how many of these have actually been implemented? Number one, almost everything that an expert panel recommends. It could be economists, it could be anybody from any walk of life who's an expert in that respective field. It could be sportsmen, for example. What actually leads to implementation is a strong political will. And do you think that some of the recommendations as part of the expert committee has it seen any light on the ground?
I serve on multiple committees, not just one. But one thing I can tell you is the political will to make a change is absolutely there in the current dispensation. When we wrote Jailed for Doing Business report in early part of this year, within hours, there were folks who reached out in the highest echelons of Indian polity and bureaucracy who engaged in a constructive dialogue with us. I'm not at a liberty of sharing the lower level details at this point, But I
Okay.
can tell
Okay.
you,
Understand.
highest echelons of Indian polity and bureaucracy, they started engaging. They wanted to look at the data instead of dismissing the findings. They wanted to figure
Mm-hmm.
out how we can be a part of the process of improving some of this. And committees
Mm-hmm.
were created in order to move the needle on the subject. Same thing with
Mm-hmm.
various
Mm-hmm.
states. States have woken up to the similar challenge. They're all working towards attracting capital, making themselves an
Mm-hmm.
attractive destination for
Mm-hmm.
manufacturing as well as service jobs. They all
Mm-hmm.
are paying attention to this term called ease of doing business. And at this point, I can tell you, if you look at how often ease of doing business as a term is used by politicians and bureaucracy today versus how
Mm-hmm.
it was 10 years ago, it is night and day.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
one thing
Okay.
that I've
Okay.
seen change dramatically is the fact that there is an acknowledgement amongst policy makers that ease of doing business is foundational to job creation
Mm-hmm.
and economic development. And if India
Mm-hmm.
has to reach its destiny during the Amrit Kal, which is where we have
Mm-hmm.
a significant demographic dividend available to us and
Mm-hmm.
reconfiguration of supply chains is happening,
Mm-hmm.
worldwide, people are looking for another manufacturer to China. War has created newfound opportunities in various sectors.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Unless we make foundational reforms, we will continue to be where we are. And not to say we are doing bad, but we can do much better, and that will help us, spiral into a next orbit of our existence from where we are today.
What is interesting is that you talked about technology playing a very vital role. So, in the regulatory environment, so what if you could sort of deep dive a bit and tell us how technology can actually help ease or the ease of doing business?
Sure. Technology plays a very, very important role. The future of compliance is paperless, presenceless, and cashless compliance. Why we
Mm-hmm.
have ease of doing business being a problem in India all this time is because of a lot of touch points between the employer and the government. That creates opportunities for rent seeking and corruption. Now, imagine if you could file a return directly from a tech system with a click of a button. You don't have to deal with any human on the other side,
Right.
right? The return goes directly into the government system, an auto generated acknowledgement comes to you. And we've seen this happen
Mm-hmm.
with income tax and GST anyway. There is a
Mm-hmm.
blueprint for that. A very
Mm-hmm.
small percentage of errors get flagged. As and when they get flagged, they go through a digital process for information seeking, which is where
Mm-hmm.
the faceless portion of this comes in. People
Mm-hmm.
can respond to those requests digitally, and
Mm-hmm.
only in a minuscule percentage of cases where a physical in contact in person association is required, rest of them just
Mm-hmm.
go straight through. And where there is a
Okay.
date and timestamp, where there is an
Mm-hmm.
acknowledgement, all of
Mm-hmm.
this is pretty much tamper proof. Nobody can
Mm-hmm.
say you didn't file or you didn't comply or what have you. If there are doubts and difficulties, Q&A and clarifications can always be sought. So
Mm-hmm.
faceless, presenceless, and paperless and cashless. All of these
Mm-hmm.
can be enabled only via technology. Whether
Okay.
it is
Okay.
application for new licenses, renewal of existing licenses, making
Mm-hmm.
payments for various services that the government offers, extension of DigiLocker from a citizen service to an enterprise service called Enterprise DigiLocker, creation of a universal enterprise number along the lines of Aadhaar for citizens. Many of
Mm-hmm.
these are initiatives where technology will play a vital role.
Okay.
Today,
Okay.
if you look at how filings get done, you go to a
Mm-hmm.
PF website. Yes, there is a website. Any employer has a login ID and password. But you look at the number of clicks that a person needs to do. They need to go through it, log in with an ID password. There is a CAPTCHA, and then you go through 13 different clicks to identify which entity, which
Right.
number, which month,
Yeah.
which period. Then you upload a file that was manually generated from another system, in most cases Excel based so far.
Yeah.
And then if you end
Mm.
up making a mistake and uploading that file into the wrong field, that creates an error. All of these can be completely avoided because, like PF, there are at least 20, 30 other websites where an employer has accounts. There is no
Which is
single sign
yeah.
on
Yeah.
today in any of these websites. Every account,
Yeah,
every
yeah,
site has a different look, feel, patterns, behaviors, user interface, and so on and so forth. How about not having to go to any website? How about government publishing APIs that can be implemented by various tech platforms? And the employer comes to a tech platform, creates a return with a click of a button, just file the return without having to know which website it went to,
yeah,
because that
yeah, yeah,
complexity is
yeah.
already subsumed within the tech platform.
Within,
Now,
yeah,
that's what
yeah, yeah,
UPI actually did.
yeah.
Government
That's true. Yeah,
used NPCI and created UPI. And
yeah.
whether it was Google Pay or Phone Pay or Bheem or any other kind of an application, you could ride on UPI and enable straight through transactions and payments between point A to point B. And that's what government has to do, create the plumbing. On top of the
Yeah,
plumbing, the services can be created by private players who create a tech ecosystem,
yeah.
app ecosystem, which ultimately make it happen. So I don't think there is any way of enabling ease of doing business without an active role of technology in it.
I agree. Let us take a simple example. Um, when you talk of ease of doing business, what should start off with? Number one, being able to set up a company, and later having the freedom to close down a company. Both these are very difficult in India. So how can technology enable that these two things to happen? And as far as closing down a company is concerned, it could be a one member or a 10 member or a thousand. What exactly happens when you're not able to do it? What are the reasons for it? Number one, how will technology enable this to happen?
So, as far as starting a company is concerned, I think government has done a lot of work in that space. Many
Mm-hmm,
years ago, it used to be a much more difficult proposition than it is now. So, a lot of
mm-hmm,
digital technologies are already at play. You could go to a Ministry of Corporate Affairs website and do a lot of things yourself, or
mm-hmm,
you can
mm-hmm,
hire a company secretary to help do some of these for you. But the
mm-hmm,
process in general has become much simpler. There are DIN numbers, there is digital signature, name search has become much easier. Registering a
mm-hmm,
company is not as big a pain as it used to be. Have we
mm-hmm,
arrived yet? The answer is no. Yes, we still
mm-hmm,
have some more way to go, and there are
mm-hmm,
things that can be done in a more simpler manner.
mm-hmm,
As far as closing down a company is concerned, the process has to become much simpler, right?
mm-hmm.
Our system, if we have to promote entrepreneurship, we all need to understand that 98% of the startup entrepreneurs, they don't survive the test of time, right? A couple of
Yeah,
percentage
that's true.
points will become successful, but 80-90%, and I was reading some recent reports where 90 up to 98% of entrepreneurs do not survive after a couple of years. Now, if that is the
That's true.
case, our
Mm-hmm,
system has to create a lot of buffer and resilience to allow for failure. But today,
mm-hmm.
system is like ये वो सीढ़ियां हैं जो ऊपर तो जाती हैं लेकिन नीचे नहीं आती. So we
You're
need to
right.
get
Yeah.
to a point where allowing for mistakes, allowing for failures, and quickly exiting those failures has to become much easier than it is right now.
Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
start an entity or an enterprise, no entrepreneur puts his personal time, energy, effort, and money at stake,
Mm-hmm.
assuming that they will have to close down. But
Okay,
statistics
okay,
tell us that closure is an important part of existence. Chances
okay.
are
Mm-hmm.
a large number of these entities, which are startup entrepreneurs, young kids coming out of colleges who have a passion to change the world, to make a dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs used to call it. They want to solve problems and they take chances. They create these enterprises, they raise
Yeah,
some
yeah,
funds, they
yeah,
take some chances. And if those
yeah.
chances don't work out, our system has to be more resilient to go allow them to go ahead and close it simply, rather than drag these things on for years, ask for tremendous amount of paperwork. There has to be slabs. If your overall liabilities or this and that is within a slab, you should just allow them to go and close
Yeah,
with simple paperwork and without having to go through a lot of litigation and hiring
which is
professionals and
true. Yeah,
consultants, because it thwarts entrepreneurship in long term. If I as an
right.
entrepreneur know that I can start, try things out, make some mistakes, and if things don't eventually work, I can put this behind me, rather than this beast will drag on with me for years, create all kinds of
Mm.
liabilities at various points in time, and I'll have to pay through the nose to consultants to deal with these problems, then there is a lot of friction right there, which can be resolved.
Yeah. As part of your company, Team Lease RegTech, what are the kind of initiatives that you have done? Apart from having sat on several of these committees, how is Team Lease trying to sort of find solutions to these issues, and what exactly are you doing in that area?
So, Giri, we are a company with a cause, right? The company is clearly there to help corporate India stay on the right side of the law. Now, if you look at corporate India, there are two kinds of enterprises. Enterprises which are sizable, which can afford their own compliance teams, right? So they do their own labor laws, they deal with their own finance and tax laws, they have their own teams to deal with all other kinds of compliances also. So these corporates have their own internal teams. We equip them with the power of technology so that transparent, accountable, traceable, and timely compliance environment can be created. Think of us like an ERP of compliance, where they can implement this and they can start getting transparent and accountable environment, forcing a culture of compliance within their organization, bubbling up all kinds of non-compliances to the fore, allowing the experts to make appropriate interventions if non-compliances are happening. That is one of the things that we do for corporate India. Help them stay on the right side of the law, provide them self-service tools so that they can create a transparent, accountable, timely, and traceable culture of compliance within their company. Second, a large majority of Indian companies don't fall into this bracket. They use service providers, whether they are labor consultants, they're tax consultants, they're company secretaries, and so on and so forth, to seek compliance services. Our technology tools, they also empower these companies, these consultants. So, for example, if a sizable labor consultant is there who's dealing with 200 clients today, believe it or not, the person is using an army of humans to use Excel sheets and process these documents and create these registers and returns and challans, and it's an error prone process, highly vulnerable, because you are dealing with macros in Excel. There are humans sitting and doing complex calculations. You're trying to create registers and challans. A lot of these are changing constantly. The Indian regulatory ecosystem changes 4,500 times a year. Unless you have access to this information, chances are you're using an old format, or you're using an old duty structure or a rate structure, and you are not in compliance. We created technology tools where the labor consultant can use our tool, put in the relevant data, which is very easy to do, and within seconds the platform churns out all the registers, records, returns in within seconds, and they are in line with the law of the land because we have deep expertise on the subject. Similarly, a company secretary, a practicing company secretary, can use our offering in order to manage all the secretarial compliances of their clients. So if a PCS or practicing company secretary is helping 100 companies comply with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs ROC regulations, our product can enable them to do so. Within minutes, they can generate the relevant documents, they can manage all the paperwork, they can create resolutions, they can create copies of agendas, they can manage board meetings, because our product comes with integrated video tools and stuff like that, to a point where now the document is ready to be filed with Ministry of Corporate Affairs. And over the period of time, we are also working with them to see if they can publish APIs so that straight through processing with a click of a button can happen. So one-click compliance, if you will, can be enabled once these APIs are created. So I think that's where, as a company, we are constantly working with enterprises with do-it-yourself or self-service tools, and then service providers for tools so that they can manage compliances and documents and records and regulatory updates and so on. As far as government is concerned, while we are working with these ecosystem partners, and as we gather intelligence, we share this intelligence with the government so that this intelligence can feed into the process of reimagining compliances for India during the Amrit Kal, as Prime Minister calls it.
Yeah. India has a federal structure, several languages, several parts of the state has several languages, and different kinds of governments in terms of It could be a left or a right or whatever kind of things. So each of them has their own political agenda to cater to and to their voter base and all that. In an environment like this, creating policies which are very common. I mean, we have a GST, but creating solutions which are common and which actually suits almost every state. Don't you think it's a huge, massive effort to do it, and it's a huge challenge?
And not really. Our constitution has created the structure in such a way that there are union laws, there are state laws, and there are local bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of them have their
Mm-hmm.
own jurisdictions, right? And
Okay.
the structure has functioned well over the last 75 years, obviously has created large amount of complexities. All we need
Mm-hmm.
to do is take another hard look at this complexity and remove everything which is irrelevant, which is duplicate, which is overlapping, which is not required, which fails the test of time, which fails the test
Mm-hmm.
of 21st century imperatives. And that's
Mm-hmm.
not as difficult as it sounds, because we
Mm-hmm.
are at no point in time have I ever said reduce the controls within compliance. I am someone who
Okay.
believes that an entrepreneur needs to do business in an accountable manner. But having
Mm-hmm.
said
Mm-hmm.
that, for every contravention, should we send them to jail? The answer is no. Can we
Yeah.
replace the
Yeah.
jail
Yeah.
term with financial penalties? Yes. Can we
Yes.
make
Yes.
those financial penalties prohibitively expensive so that it can serve as a deterrent and correct behaviors? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what other
Yeah.
countries of the world have done. And I think we need to
Mm-hmm.
take a leaf out of their book and go through a similar process. Unless there is a loss
Okay.
of life or limb or an intention to defraud, steal, exploit, or hurt nature, there are a whole bunch of examples we have given in our jail for doing business report where the jail
Mm-hmm.
term needs to continue. We need to keep our entrepreneurs accountable. Anybody who has a menseria, who's doing things with an intention to hurt, steal, fraud, exploit. We are not asking any dilution of clauses there. But procedural non-compliances. I failed to put yethe bal kamgar kam karit nahit at the reception, which is we don't employ child labor. Should there be a jail term for that? We failed to put a spittoon in the right place in our factory. Should there be a jail term for that? We failed to whitewash the inner walls of the toilet. Should there be a jail term for that? We failed to reconstitute the canteen committee once every 2 years. Should there be a jail term for that? All of these are examples where there is no gross violation of anything. Nobody is really hurt. No stealing, fraud, exploitation has happened. But the sheer number of compliances, the sheer complexity among them needs to come down. We have to create an ecosystem where the regulatory environment is enabling rather than creating hurdles for entrepreneurship.
So, what leads to criminality would be misuse of PF funds, something like that. An example.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your point.
What constitutes criminality? I'm giving that as an example. Misuse of PF fund.
Of course, and
okay,
there is a whole bunch of examples that we have given in our jail for doing business report. Anyone who wants to understand the regulatory complexity within India, the all-pervasive congenital regulatory cholesterol that ails the country, should read the report. It's a 109-page report, freely available, titled Jailed for Doing Business. We have dissected India's employer compliance data into various different categories. And we have given 31 recommendations there to deal with this complexity. So I think a lot of detail is already there. So I would not want to go repeat that.
Yeah.
But procedural lapses, tactical non-compliances need to be revisited.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Agrawal. Thank you for taking time off to talk to the Federal. Thank you very much.